Hello, I'm Owen Ralph from Greenwood Side, and in this video I want to talk about distributing your music video content on social platforms. Now I'm going to caveat this a little bit by saying that what I'm going to talk about is quite granular and quite in-depth, and it might sound like a massive faff to do it all. So which elements you take of this, which you discard, which you keep, is entirely up to you. It's up to your video editing skills, it's up to how much time you've got, it's up to which platforms you're interested in optimizing. So take and leave whichever bits of this that you want, but I just want to go through everything, basically. So you finished filming, you've got your video. What do you do with it then in terms of getting it out on your social channels? So a couple of questions before you start. Firstly, where is your audience at the moment? Which channels are the ones where you have the most followers, are the ones where you get the most engagement? Those are probably the ones that you want to prioritize in terms of keeping your content optimized for them, keeping that audience happy, because you don't want to lose them by straying off to try and make it work on a different platform and it not working on the existing ones. Secondly, where are the audiences that you're trying to reach? If you're going for kind of the core folk audience, they're largely on Facebook, and particularly if you're trying to sell tickets through this content, that's really the platform where you're going to find them. If you want to reach a bit of a younger audience, then Instagram is kind of the place to go. Thirdly, which are the channels that you want to grow? So if your long-term intention is to start monetizing your content, then YouTube is far and away the best place to do that. Facebook will also allow you to monetize in some ways, so you might want to consider that. If the visual side of what you do is really important to you and you want to create kind of videos which are visually pleasing as well as audibly, then Instagram might be the place, because that's a very visual platform. So it's up to you, it's up to what you want to be doing. So I'm going to refer to a few things over and over again in what follows. So just to explain what I'm talking about, aspect ratio, I'm sure you know, is basically the shape of your video. Is it like that? Is it like that? Is it like that? Is it a hexagon? Don't make it a hexagon. And then the duration of it, obviously, how long is it? And the other one, which you might not think is a thing, but it's something to consider, is your thumbnail, because video thumbnails aren't always as straightforward as you might expect, particularly when we get to Instagram, but I'll talk about that in a bit. If you don't want to do a huge amount of editing and just want to get your video out basically in one go, the safest way to do that is to put it out in a standard 16:9 format, widescreen. It's not a great aspect ratio for mobile phones, particularly people are scrolling through a feed, because 16:9 is basically as small as it can get on a phone screen when it's portrait. But it's fine, it's a very standard aspect ratio, nobody will be puzzled by it. So if you're just going to do one video, just do that, keep it simple. So let's talk about more channel specific recommendations. So firstly, let's talk about YouTube, which, and I haven't been paid to say this, is basically the home of online video, isn't it? It's if you're doing video as your thing, that's where the audience is for it. People on YouTube don't mind longer content, but they do expect higher quality content in general. You need to be aware of what other videos you're kind of sitting alongside on YouTube. They're all generally quite high quality. People are often watching YouTube on larger screens, on TVs or desktop computers. If they're watching on mobile, they might well be turning it sideways, which they don't on all platforms. So 16:9 is good for YouTube. It's kind of, think of it as cinematic content. So that's pretty straightforward for YouTube. I think it's a fairly self-explanatory channel. But now let's think more broadly about the social media channels, the ones that we think about in those terms. So remember that Facebook, Twitter and Instagram nowadays are all tailored for mobile. Instagram is kind of the archetypical one, which is unequivocally a mobile platform, but all the others are now as well. That's just how it is. Younger people are using their phones for it, older people are experiencing those channels on tablets. The demographic who are using desktop computers as their default way of looking specifically at social media platforms, that demographic is getting smaller and smaller. So firstly, Facebook. There is a newish platform within Facebook, which you may not be aware of, called Creator Studio, which is quite similar to YouTube Studio. I mean, they've probably just copied it, frankly. But that's kind of your dashboard for creating online video through your page. And that's really what you should be using if you want to be putting out videos regularly. It still definitely feels quite new. It's a bit buggy. It's got a lot of improvements to be made, but I'd recommend getting started with it now, because increasingly all of the things that you could do just directly through your page are moving exclusively into Creator Studio. So get ahead while you can. When creating video adverts, so that's paid video, Facebook's recommendation is to put the video out at a 4:5 aspect ratio. So that's portrait, but a little bit smaller than your phone screen, because that just shows up really well when you're scrolling through a feed. So I would recommend, if you want to really optimize for Facebook, either go for that 4:5 or go square, because that just is going to show up much larger than a 16:9 landscape will, because it's going to be the same width but taller. So when people are scrolling through their feeds, you will be on their screen for much longer and they're more likely to stop. On Facebook, videos which are over 3 minutes perform best, particularly if you're looking to monetize your videos eventually. Then it needs to be over 3 minutes. That's the point at which you can start monetizing those videos. So next, let's talk about Instagram. So Instagram has got a bit more complicated in recent years, but you can do a bit more with it now than you could previously. So let's dig into that, shall we? So what you may or may not know is that Instagram now has a subsection of the platform called IGTV, which is specifically for longer form videos. For a standard account, you can now upload videos which are up to 10 minutes long. For big brand accounts, they can upload to a whole hour. Initially, the platform was only for full portrait 9:16, phone turned on its portrait axis video, and it was specifically for people watching longer videos in that portrait mode. You can now upload horizontal 16:9 videos, which everyone breathed a sigh of relief at, I think. I'm still quite fond of the 9:16 portrait because it's a really nice video experience when you're holding your phone portrait. If you don't want to take such a close crop, then it's fine, just go with the 16:9 landscape. But crucially, it does not accept square videos or the 4:5 I talked about just now for Facebook. So that's why I say if you're only going to do one thing, make sure it's the 16:9 landscape. If you just do a square, you won't be able to upload it to IGTV. There's a minimum requirement for those videos, which is 60 seconds. If it's under 60 seconds, then you can still upload it as a standard Instagram post. Either way kind of is fine. So before we carry on, I've got 2 warnings for you and 2 tips. So warning number 1, some people like to very carefully curate their Instagram profiles. So when you look at the photo grid, it all looks very pretty. When you upload an IGTV video, the thumbnail, unless you choose for it not to, will appear in that grid. And I would say always do, otherwise people will never see the video, frankly. So just be aware of that. If you're curating how that looks, don't just upload the video and expect it to not show up in the grid. You've got to think about how it's going to look. Second warning is watch out for the thumbnail crop. Now this is where thumbnails get quite complicated, because even for a landscape 16:9 video, it only accepts a portrait thumbnail, 9:16. So it allows you to upload a custom thumbnail, and I would highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, you're not ever going to be really sure what you end up with for that portrait thumbnail from a horizontal video. But the other thing to be aware about is even when you upload that 9:16 portrait thumbnail, when it shows up in your profile, it will be cropped down to square. So be very careful when making it to make sure that the square in the middle, if you chop off the top and bottom, makes sense as an image. It's a really common mistake if you've got a face in the video and the eyes come just above that middle square. When it shows up in your profile, then you're going to have a face with no eyes, which looks terrible. So you have to be quite careful with how you do those thumbnails. So those are the warnings. 2 tips for you now. Particularly if you've done a bit of editing on the video, I would recommend uploading from your computer, which you can do for IGTV and you can't for standard mobile posts, or at least you couldn't. More on that in a moment. To upload to IGTV, just go to your Instagram profile in your web browser, click the little television icon, and you can just hit upload and upload it as you would a YouTube video, for example. What you can also do now is do it through Facebook Creator Studio, which I mentioned earlier, and you can also do standard posts through that. So in general, I would recommend actually doing all your Facebook and all your Instagram through Creator Studio, because then it's all in one place and you don't need to keep hopping around to different places. And the other tip is once you've uploaded your IGTV video, if you don't mind a bit more editing, then cut out a 15-second clip, which works quite well on its own, use that as an Instagram story, and then you can add a swipe up link to your IGTV video. Now, for external web links, you can only add those swipe up things if you've got a big brand account, but for IGTV, anyone can do it. So if you just upload your story, click the little link icon at the top, then you can link it through to your full video. So people can get a 15-second snapshot of it when you're doing a story, and then if they want to, they can swipe up and see the full video. That really does help you reach a lot more people, for the people who kind of are much more likely to just browse through stories than they are through the feed. So finally, Twitter. Now this is the least video-friendly platform. It's still one of the few platforms where the actual text, those 280 characters, is still the core content, and anything else is kind of subsidiary. People go there for people's kind of hot political takes and all that stuff. So it's never going to be your primary platform for video. In general, what you're going to want to do is use that as a place to push people to your YouTube channel. That generally seems to be the best option. And YouTube is the best place to send people because it's the one which definitely doesn't require you to sign in. If you send them to Facebook, they start getting pop-ups and things which just let them watch the video, but it'll just be less of a nice user experience. So send people to YouTube. The two things you can do for video here is you can either just send them to YouTube and it'll embed a little YouTube thing, then they can click it and it'll open up. Or you can upload a section of the video. Now there's a maximum of 140 seconds for videos on Twitter. So again, you would probably need to cut out a little section because your song is probably going to be longer than that, and then post that as a video and then say in the copy, watch the full video at this YouTube link. That can be quite an effective way of doing it, I think, and it's better really than just putting the YouTube link, because then when people are scrolling through, they see the video immediately, it starts playing, they can't really miss it. And in terms of the aspect ratio for Twitter, square is the optimum, because again, it's bigger in the feed than your 16:9, but if you go taller than square, then it starts cutting off the top. So there we go. I appreciate that was quite a lot of information, and it sounds like a bit of a faff, as I said in the beginning. But yeah, take what works for you, take what works for the platforms you're particularly interested in, and it's worth spending a bit of time on this stuff because it really does help your videos get to more people, and it helps your channels and your audience on them grow a bit. So it's definitely worth spending some time on it. However, the most important thing above everything else I've said is still just to create a really good video, because no matter how well you distribute it, if it's a bad video, it's going to do badly. So go and create good things.